Well, good morning, my fellow JFK travelers. This is Barry Jones with Standards Plus History Academy, and we are continuing with our JFK series. And we've been in the Lee Harvey Oswald uh, topic field for a while. And yesterday, in episode 27, we concluded the doppelganger part of that series. And today, the next couple episodes, we'll be looking at a new uh, area of interest that revolves around Lee Harvey Oswald. This is one of my favorite parts of the Lee Harvey Oswald angle, anyway. And it's can really be summed up in two questions. I don't think you can separate these two. I think they're related. So we're going to address them both simultaneously. The question is, what did the Russians know about Oswald and when did they know it? And then that feeds right into, as they're learning about Oswald, what did the Russians know about the assassinations and when did they know it? And we're going to be looking for the next couple of days at this fella pictured on the left. His name is Richard Case Nagell. And boy, what a fascinating story he is. This is an event that actually happened before the assassination that could have prevented the assassination. And then when you start following the leads, just looking at this man and his career, his associations, it's a huge puzzle piece. Jim Garrison said he looked at Richard Case Nagell. He was the most important witness. All the witnesses he interviewed or that he researched in relation to the JFK assassination, this was the most important. So think about that statement. More important than Jack Ruby, more important than even Oswald himself. This guy is the most important. And there's a lot of important people involved in this assassination. So be interested to look at him. A little backstory before we get into this, relating to the first question, what did the Russians know about Oswald? When did they know it? If you remember, going back a few episodes now, Oswald trained, once he joined the military, he trained for a mission to go to Russia. That was confirmed by his actions. Who takes Russian language training? Who acts communist during the Cold War unless you are being prepped for something? But it was also confirmed by McCone, the CIA director, who put it in a memo saying, yeah, we trained, the CIA trained him under the cover of the Office of Naval Intelligence to go to Russia, a special mission in our fake defector program. So, the Russians knew about the fake defector program. And so they put Oswald through the paces because they thought he might be one. And Oswald fell back on his training, faked a suicide attempt, got to spend some extended time at the KGB and turned over radar secrets to the U-2 plane, at which time the Russians thought, well, let's put him on ice for a little bit and see if this information pans out. And so the next time we saw Oswald, he had been rewarded with this luxury apartment in Minsk. He was getting 2 stipends, one from a factory, which was basically a no-show job, the other from the Russian secret police. He was living high on the hog. He had privileges that ordinary Russians didn't have, hunting privileges, travel privileges, a 16-gauge shotgun. He was dating. He was living the high life. And then 6 months after all that happens, the U-2 goes down. And so his information proved correct. Even Francis Gary Powers later said, boy, when they questioned me, it sure seemed like they were interested in what was going on at Atsugi, and they had a lot of inside information about what had been going on at Atsugi. Of course, that's where Oswald had been stationed. All right, so then we fast forward, and he sends a letter to the American embassy requesting his passport back because he intends to go back to America. At this point, the Russians realize, oh, he was fake. There's no way, if he's a real defector, he wants to go back to America having announced that he was giving up military secrets. That would be treason. He would be charged with treason unless he's part of this fake defector program, then he won't be. He was here to do that. That was his mission. And so, they find this out because they intercept the letter. So they know now what he's up to. He sends another letter because he never heard back from the American embassy, doubles down on his request. And so at this point, the KGB kicks a plan of their own into action, which is to have him get hitched up with one of their own. And so Marina Prusakova enters the scene. And 6 weeks after they meet at that dance in Minsk, they're married. And they have a child, and as confirmation that he was a fake defector, the Americans not only allow him to come back, they pay for him to come back, and his wife and his child. So by the time he gets to the point where he is leaving Russia, the Russians know that Oswald is intelligence. They know that he gave up the radar secrets to the U-2 plane. That's where they got him. They know he was sent to do that. They know that it sabotaged the Paris Peace Summit between Khrushchev and Eisenhower. And so they know that this is an important puzzle piece, or an important piece of the American intelligence puzzle. And so they want to keep tabs on this guy, even though of course, they got Marina hitched to him. And so that's one way to do it. But they're going to keep tabs on this guy, because they figure, if he's this important, that they can send him over here and not disavow after the mission is accomplished, but to actually go through the lengths to bring him back, and his wife and his child. He must be important in the future. There must be something else that we need to stay aware of, because he caught us unaware at first, but fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So that's a little bit of the backstory before we get to the events relating to Richard Case Nagell. Here's the quote by Jim Garrison, the most important witness there is. And this book, entitled The Man Who Knew Too Much, is exclusively about Richard Case Nagell. So I've entitled my slide presentation the same as the book, which is the primary source for a lot of this material, but it comes from other places. I got a lot of source material from Jim Garrison himself in his book, On the Trail of the Assassins. So it's not a story a lot of people know a lot about. Let's just talk about the story first, what he did on September 20, 1963. So here we are, we're literally 2 months before the assassination, and we're in the final stages. This is just for a little perspective. Oswald and Judith Baker have sort of gone off the grid in New Orleans, and it won't be until about the 25th that Oswald reappears on a bus heading for Mexico City, simultaneous to a doppelganger appearing on Sylvia Odio's doorstep in Dallas. Then we have the whole Mexico City thing, and then Dallas. So this is the end of the quiet month, so to speak, when Oswald sort of went dark in New Orleans. Nagell walks into a bank in El Paso, Texas, and fires 2 shots from a Colt 45 into the wall right up by the ceiling. Just walks in, boom, boom, fires 2 shots, goes outside and sits in his car and waits to be arrested. I mean, it was that strange. And so the police, what do we charge him with? He didn't burglarize, he didn't try to steal anything. He just went in and shot twice at the ceiling and turned around. They got to charge him with something. So they're interrogating him, and he tells the police, I would rather be arrested down here in El Paso, Texas, than commit murder and treason. That's a strange statement. And so a little background, we'll come back to that statement and what it means, but a little background on this guy. The Nagell was a counterintelligence officer in the U.S. Army from 1955 to 59. So um, he's intel. He's military intelligence. Now, if you remember, where the ONI officer who was riding in the car with Jack Revel, Dallas Police, when they were going to Dallas Police headquarters with the personnel records of the Texas School Book Depository to form a list, a roster to see who was at work that day, who wasn't, who was missing from the roll call, et cetera, et cetera. It was the ONI officer who fed Lieutenant Jack Revel the name Harvey Lee Oswald. And he got it from Army intelligence, who he was in contact with. So this guy has roots. He has a background in Army intelligence, 55 to 59, which is where the original story came, or the original tip came, that it was the guy they're looking for is not Alec Heidel. The guy they're looking for is Harvey Lee Oswald. Of course, they gave the name wrong and they gave the address wrong, but that's how we know. He was assigned to field operations intelligence to carry out CIA policy and cover. This is according to his bio. And he was trained with his file, actually trained with simple and intricate weapons to be used in assassinations. So this guy, there's no way for the police in El Paso, Texas to know any of this at this point, or for it to even mean anything. The assassination hasn't happened in Dallas yet. This is just his background. It's what he's trained in. He's trained in doing things for the CIA, cover operations. Okay. A cover operation is an operation to provide an alternate story to what's actually going on. So that's what he's trained in. And he's also trained in use of weapons for assassination purposes. All right. This guy, he's pretty important. All right. And then you follow it, trace him forward, and he was stationed in Japan, Tokyo, as a double agent in liaison with Soviet intelligence, during which he worked with another counterintelligence agent named Lee Harvey Oswald. And both used the same code name, Heidel. Wow. Now, again, in September 1963, none of this means anything. Well, most of the free world doesn't even know who Lee Harvey Oswald is at this point. It only means something after the fact. So this guy worked when Oswald was in Japan. They were both in Japan simultaneously. When Oswald was in Japan, this guy worked with him. They both used the same cover name or code name. And they were both in counterintelligence. So, this guy, Richard Case Nagell, was that means they're both double agents. You know, that they're working both sides, but they're working for the CIA. But they're pretending when they're with the Russians that they're working with them. Okay, that's Richard Case Nagell's job. Oswald is in counterintel as well. He has a different assignment, and we learned what that was. His job was to feed, when he was in Atsugi, to feed those Russian hostess, those KGB hostesses at the Queen Bee, all this disinformation from the CIA. And meanwhile, he was working his day job with radar, doing radar for race car, that U-2 plane. So they both have their assignments. And it's interesting. They both have the same code name. I wonder how often that happens. But anyway, fast forward now to 1963, which is the year in question. Nagell is continuing his work as a double agent. So while Oswald has gone on, and he did his thing in Russia, and now he's been reassigned. He came back to Dallas, Fort Worth, and then he was reassigned to New Orleans. And we talked about that whole summer in New Orleans. That's winding down now, and we're getting, we're getting close to the assassination, which means he's been reassigned to Dallas. Meanwhile, Richard Case Nagell is still working as a double agent, and he's been working as a double agent. He's been working with Soviet intelligence in Mexico City, reporting back to his CIA handler or boss, Cuban task force guy, Desmond Fitzgerald. So that's who he reports to. He's working with Soviet intelligence. They think he's one of them, but he's really working for the CIA, and his value to the CIA is giving them inside information about the Soviets, right? But at the same time, he's feeding the Soviets information about the CIA. He's whatever information the CIA wants him to feed. So he's working both sides. And one of the assignments that he'd been given, and this goes back to my lead in as we began today, the KGB told him, we want you to monitor Lee Harvey Oswald, this fake defector who in 1962 returned back to the United States from Russia. Your job is to monitor him. So we got a lot of people monitoring Lee Harvey Oswald, especially as you get to 1963. And we already talked about James Hosty, the FBI agent in Dallas, whose job it is to keep tabs on this former defector. And now you've got this Richard Case Nagell who's watching him. And of course the CIA is moving him around like a chess piece. So they're keeping eyes on him. So a lot of people, this is why it's so disingenuous. It makes absolutely no sense at all after the assassination for all these intelligence agencies to claim ignorance. We don't know who this guy is. That's just not true. That's not true at all. So Richard Case Nagell is his job is to get as close as he can to Oswald to keep tabs on him for the Russians. Well, so this is going on during that summer in New Orleans. And here's that picture, that famous picture of Oswald leafleting with Angel Cruz. And you see all those hangers on around the participating, probably unemployed guys that he paid cash money to help him leaflet until the media showed up. But Angel almost always was with him. We learned that yesterday. So was Leopoldo. And while monitoring Oswald, Nagell becomes involved in New Orleans and then later Texas with the same people that Oswald is involved with. So that would be the two Cuban exiles, Angel and Leopoldo. And what he discovers is that there is an operation that Angel and Leopoldo are involved in, and by extension, so is Lee Harvey Oswald, in an operation to kill JFK. And so Nagell learns this, and he learns that this is a Angel and Leopoldo are really the ones involved in this, and they are part of a CIA-financed anti-Castro militant group called Alpha 66. And Oswald's role in this, we'll talk about just a second, but Oswald had infiltrated this Alpha 66 group, and he was informing for the FBI. If you remember how in the world he got back into the United States in such a hassle-free reentry with his background, with his attempt to give up military secrets, his attempt to give up his American citizenship, his defection to the Soviet Union during the height of the Cold War, he just walks right back into the United States, no hassles. Well, we talked about that. Bobby Kennedy made a deal with him. Bobby Kennedy was the attorney general. He makes the decision whether or not Oswald's going to face any kind of legal jeopardy. And the deal that they made was that Oswald, perfectly situated to spy on the CIA for Bobby, would do that because he's an agent for the CIA. He's an asset. He's already inside. You want to come back to the United States, then you have to report back to me. You have to become an FBI informant for me, for the FBI, because it had become increasingly frustrating to the Kennedy White House, all that the CIA was involved in 61, 62, 63, that they didn't have any knowledge of or felt like they were being deceived about. And they couldn't get accurate information about what the goings on of the CIA. So they needed some straight information. And so that was where Oswald comes in. And You remember that's the role that Hosty fulfilled for him. In Dallas, he was his contact. He would give that information to Hosty, and Hosty would feed it into the channels, the appropriate channels. And if you remember, it was a man named Lee who had informed the FBI field office in Chicago that there was an assassination plot on November 2 to kill JFK there. And that is Lee Harvey Oswald. That he is the FBI informant. So that's how he got into the country. That's the role that he's fulfilling for Bobby Kennedy. And in infiltrating this Alpha 66 group, he is informing on this Alpha 66 group back through the appropriate channels. So he is the conduit of information. He's not actively a part of the plot to kill JFK, although he's playing along. He's there to inform. And of course, Nagell knows this. But there's something that is going on behind the scenes that Oswald doesn't know. Here you see in a picture, an article, Oswald tried to spy on anti-Castro exile groups. So this is pretty well known at this point. This is what his role was in this whole deal. He's spying on Alpha 66. He's not actually a participant in the plot to kill the president. Few pictures, few faces, hopefully you recognize. Bottom left, that's David Atlee Phillips. David Atlee Phillips is the guy who's running this CIA Alpha 66 operation. If you remember, David Atlee Phillips is the guy, he's in charge of the Mexico City station, CIA Mexico City station, and his expertise is in disinformation. And he's the one that comes up with the whole Mexico City story about Oswald, which later becomes completely debunked. The guy next to him on the right is Carlos Bringuier. He's one of those anti-Castros in New Orleans that there's a confrontation with him and Oswald in the street. If you remember, they both get arrested. He's anti-Castro, and Oswald had come in days earlier offering his help. Then days later, he's out leafleting pro-Castro literature. So they get in this verbal exchange, and eventually it looks like it's going to turn into a physical exchange. The cops arrest him. The whole thing was staged. It was designed to get attention. So anyway, back to Alpha 66. So David Atlee Phillips is running this whole thing. And of course, Richard Nagell is in a perfect place to be able to spy on this whole deal, because David Atlee Phillips is based out of Mexico City. That's where Richard Case Nagell is based out of. And Oswald's going to end up down there. And we'll talk about that later. I do believe Oswald did go to Mexico City, just not for the reasons the CIA wants anybody to know about. That's why they came up with their alternate story. And during this time, this is what was frustrating the Kennedy White House. Alpha 66 is literally waging its own war in Cuba, stoking up all kinds of, dangerous scenarios. They'd been attacking Russian ships that were in Cuba's ports. They were obviously doing their crop burnings and all the propaganda campaigns, and they were just really messing around in Cuba, trying to provoke a war. They wanted the United States and Cuba to go to war. This is 63. Now, a little understanding of the backstory is important here to understand why the Kennedy White House is so upset about this and why they need a guy like Oswald to give them information about what the CIA is up to, because it could lead to a war with the Soviet Union. You go back in 61, we had the Bay of Pigs disaster. And this is when Kennedy realized that the CIA will lie to a president. And he's already learned kind of the hard way that they had lied to him during the campaign in 60. They had convinced him that there was a missile gap. He went around and repeated that story. Then he gets to be president, realized there's not a missile gap. We actually have way more. Our arsenal of nuclear weapons is much larger than the Soviets. And the missile gap was based on the premise that was the opposite, that we were behind. It was designed to make Nixon and Eisenhower look bad, get Kennedy elected. But it was a lie. And Kennedy, like a fool, went around and repeated the lie. And so he's already suspicious of the CIA. And then when the CIA tells him, oh, this Bay of Pigs thing, it's going to be easy peasy. The Cuban people are going to rise up and join the revolt. They don't like Castro either. And uh, we won't have to use any U.S. military. Their Air Force has been taken out already, so that we don't have to worry about any of their planes. None of that proved true. And then when they came to him, because it was going badly, and asked for U.S. military support, he said, no, this is supposed to be covert. You said it was going to be covert. That's what I agreed to, covert. And they said, well, it'll fail if you don't help. And he said, well, then it's going to fail. And he's only 3 months into his administration at that point. And um, it was just lie upon lie upon lie. And he realized that later that the Bay of Pigs thing was designed to fail and force Kennedy's hand to involve the military, which would lead us into a war. That was really what they wanted. They wanted a war with Cuba to overthrow Castro, reinstall an American puppet, and reopen Cuban for business. And the difference was, whereas in the past, Eisenhower fell for it and gave him military support in Iran and Guatemala, Kennedy didn't. Whether he was acting on, maybe it was just stubbornness. I don't know. But Kennedy didn't give into it. And so Bay of Pigs failed. And boy, the CIA, this is, you go back and look in the 50s and all their covert ops, everything always succeeded. But it was a lot because the military backed them up. Well, this case, it didn't. And this is egg all over their face. And of course, you remember famously the press conference when Kennedy stands there in front of the American people and takes all the blame publicly. Says, I'm the responsible officer of government. Victory has 1,000 fathers, defeat is an orphan, blah, blah, blah. But privately, he tells those close to him, I want to shatter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. He declares war on the CIA. He starts bringing it under the authority of his brother and giving the Joint Chiefs more power and covert ops. And so the CIA takes money away. And then he fires the top three guys, Allen Dulles, Richard Bissell, Cabell, the guys that had been responsible for Bay of Pigs. So there was a war going on between the White House and the CIA. And then if you fast forward the next year, we had the Berlin Wall being built. And it appears that Kennedy's going to let the Russians build a wall. The CIA's furious. How can you do this? And then 62 is the Cuban Missile Crisis, which the CIA and the Joint Chiefs view as a do-over, a potential do-over. You screwed up Bay of Pigs, Mr. Kennedy. This is your chance at a do-over. And all their advice was to bomb the missile bases and invade Cuba. Again, they want a war with Cuba. That's what they want. And again, Kennedy rebuffs them and finds an alternate method to resolve the crisis, and quarantine and 13 days of a standoff. But one of the things that he had promised, or he'd made some promises to Khrushchev throughout all these scenarios. One was that the operation, which was called Operation 40, to provoke a war with Cuba during this Bay of Pigs fiasco, he said, I'm gonna cancel that whole operation. That's done. That's over with. We missed our chance. But he didn't. He lied to Khrushchev. All he did was change the name, and Operation 40 morphed into Operation Mongoose, which, of course, Khrushchev knows this. And so that's one of the reasons why, one of the pretexts, anyway, that the Soviets gave for putting the missiles in Cuba. They knew that the Americans were not done trying to invade in Cuba. They were not done meddling in Cuba's affairs. What they really want is a war with Cuba. They don't think Kennedy and his brother Bobby, after the Bay of Pigs went south, they weren't necessarily converts to the idea that we're just going to leave Cuba alone. They doubled down on that, but they just didn't want the CIA in charge of it. So you put Bobby kind of in charge of it, and they were going to do whatever it took to get rid of Castro. They were true believers in that initially. And then but by the time we get to 63, however, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy's starting to change his mind. And we had come to the brink of nuclear war, and he and Khrushchev were basically the two forces in each other's country that stood up against hardliners in both countries to prevent this war. And so their view completely changes now. And Cuba becomes a different set of encyclopedias, so to speak, for Kennedy especially. And he, remember, he had made a promise to Khrushchev. Operation 40 is defunct. We're disassembling that whole operation. You don't have to worry about that anymore. And Khrushchev figured out that he was lying to him, put the missiles in Cuba. And so Kennedy saw in real time what happened when he lied to Khrushchev and how close it brought us to nuclear war. That's my main point here. So this time, as a result of the Cuban Missile Crisis and the deal that they struck, a lot of people don't know this. Publicly, the deal was that Khrushchev would pull the missiles out of Cuba. It looked like a big victory for Kennedy. But privately, Kennedy offered Khrushchev two promises. One, I'll pull the missiles that we have aimed at you out of Turkey, and we'll never invade Cuba again. We're not going to meddle in Cuba's affairs anymore. And so he wants Khrushchev to believe his promise this time. But Khrushchev's kind of taking a wait and see attitude, like he did the first time. He says, you made that promise after the Bay of Pigs and you lied. So you're making this promise now. We'll see. We'll see. Well, Kennedy followed through with it. As far as an official policy is concerned from the White House, we began pulling back in our efforts to overthrow Castro. In fact, in 1963, Kennedy's actually back channeling with Castro through intermediaries, trying to figure out a way. Can we recognize Cuba's government? Can we, can we find some middle ground where we can coexist? And he's back channeling. Of course, the CIA knows that they're back channeling. They've wired bugs people's phones. They know who, he's William Atwood and the Lisa Howard, the ABC News reporter, and Gene Daniel. I mean, all these folks that are being used as intermediaries, the CIA knows what they're doing, and they're not happy about this. They want war with Cuba, and here Kennedy's talk about rapprochement, right? Rapprochement, which is like a peaceful resolution to the problem. He's doing it simultaneously. He's back channeling still with Khrushchev. And at the end of October, they're going to come up with the nuclear test ban treaty. So the CIA knows all this is going on, and all their plans of a war with Cuba have fallen apart. As long as Kennedy's in power, all their plans have fallen apart. And so this Alpha 66, acting on orders of David Atlee Phillips, they said, well, we'll just do our own thing. And so they're bombing Russian ships in the harbors at Cuba. They're leading raids in Cuba. They're burning crops. They're continuing all the same operations that Operation 40 did prior to Bay of Pigs, that Operation Mongoose did after Bay of Pigs. It looks like business as usual. And it's designed to look that way to make Khrushchev think that Kennedy lied to him again and create this distrust between the two governments. And so, JFK is trying to earn the trust of Khrushchev, and people in his own government, CIA, are sabotaging that. And he's furious. This is one of the reasons why in 1962, Bobby made that deal with Lee Harvey Oswald. We need to know what the CIA is up to, what they're planning. And so here is this operation going on down in Mexico City. Oswald has infiltrated it. He knows, he's reporting back to the White House about what the CIA and Alpha 66 doing in Cuba. And that's one of the reasons why the White House, using the Border Patrol and Customs Office, people, anybody they could find, they could trust, to go down and raid these camps down in New Orleans and Miami and other places to shut down these training camps that the CIA is using to launch these operations against Cuba. And of course, this is making the CIA more furious because he's taking their weapons. He's arresting several of their leaders. He arrests E. Howard Hunt, Frank Sturgis, because these guys are disobeying official U.S. policy. They're violating law. They're making war against a nation that we are not at war with. That's their own personal jihad. So we've got this war going on between the White House and the CIA, and the CIA sponsored groups like Alpha 66. And And smack dab in the middle of all that is Lee Harvey Oswald and Richard Case Nagell, who is assigned to watch Lee Harvey Oswald, to follow him around. And what Nagell realizes is that something that Oswald didn't know is that, yes, Oswald had infiltrated the plot, but he was being set up himself. Yeah, this is a wilderness of mirrors. A lot of things going on both ways, and you got to be on your toes. This is why people who tell me Oswald was a dupe and he was they make it sound like he was a high school dropout, but they make him sound like he was dumb. You can't be in intelligence and be dumb. Now, this is one case where he didn't realize to the extent that Nagell did what was being set up behind the scenes. And so the KGB tells Nagell, you need to go to this Oswald guy. You need to go to Oswald and tell him what we know. And that is that Angel and Leopoldo are setting him up to be the assassination patsy in this whole scam. So Angel and Leopoldo are part of an Alpha 66 plot to assassinate JFK. And Lee Harvey Oswald infiltrates that, and he's like he was supposed to, like he's been doing since he came back from Russia. He's been infiltrating all these little plots. He's already helped the White House foil this little private war against Cuba, which is why the White House send down the forces to shut down the training bases. And now he's infiltrated this assassination plot. There is corroborating information about this, by the way, from Judith Very. It was the one person that Oswald would confide in. And when he gets to Dallas and they have these phone conversations back and forth, she's back in Florida, he's telling her what he's learning. He's telling her on the phone because she puts it in her book. So he has infiltrated this plot. He's not a part of this plot. In fact, he tells her, I got to stay in it. I can't leave. If I leave, this thing's going to work. My job is to try to foil it. My job, like I did in Chicago, I foiled that. I'm going to try to foil this one. But what he doesn't realize is that he's being set up to be the patsy by Angel and Leopoldo. And we've just got through talking about all the different doppelganger sightings and how many times Angel and Leopoldo were together, how many times they were with Oswald. And it seems like they're, in a lot of these cases, they're together. And Leopoldo seems to be the one pulling the strings here, but Angel's involved as well. So the KGB knows this. And they say, you've got to go to Lee Harvey Oswald and tell him, because what's going to happen is they're going to blame the assassination of Oswald and by extension on us, because he is already been sheep dipped as a communist, as a Marxist. He came to Russia. He married a Russian woman. He is trying to get passports to go to Cuba and back to Russia. So by blaming him, the U.S. government is setting it up to blame us. So we've got to short circuit this whole plan and let Oswald know where he stands in this whole scenario so as to protect ourselves. And if you can't convince him of this, kill him. Just kill him and take out their patsy so that they have to start over with a different patsy who isn't sheep dipped as a communist. So that's the purpose. They want to prevent the JFK. The KGB wants to prevent the JFK assassination. In other words, our enemy wants to save the life of our president. And in doing so, sabotage the CIA's efforts to scapegoat the Soviets for the president's death. I don't think their motives were altruistic in this. They weren't doing it because they loved JFK. They were doing it to save their own bacon, right? And to prevent a war. Because this is classic Operation Northwoods right here. Hit a prominent American target, blame it on a foreign target, and justify a war. This is what's going on. So they're trying to take out the middleman, the patsy, which points towards them. And meanwhile, our government, or the shadow government, is working to assassinate our president so that we can get the war that we've always wanted. So Nagell later said, if anybody wanted to stop the assassination, it would be the KGB. They just didn't do enough. They just didn't do enough. So what's Nagell do? Well, Nagell, he's caught in he's got himself in a little bit of a box. And we'll explain that in just a minute. But in September of 63, he meets with Oswald in New Orleans. So this is before New Orleans even, or before Oswald even leaves New Orleans. He's not on the bus yet going to Mexico City. Nagell travels up and meets with him. So this, just the fact that they met shows that they have a relationship. Okay. They've been working together. This goes back to their time together in Japan. Okay. They worked together in Japan. This is one of the reasons why the KGB wanted him to keep tabs on Oswald, because Oswald knows him. And it's easy for Nagell to get close to him because they've worked together. They're both CIA agents in counterintel. Oswald doesn't know that Nagell is reporting back to the Soviets what he's learning about Oswald and Oswald's activities, but he knows Nagell. They've been on the same side of this for a long time now. So they meet as associates, maybe even friends. I don't know. I don't know the extent of their relationship. But Nagell meets him and says, "Hey, buddy, listen, this isn't what it seems. I know you think you've infiltrated and you're reporting back, but and you have infiltrated, but they're using you and setting you up. You're going to be the guy who takes the fall in this whole thing." So this is where we have documented evidence that Oswald is being informed before he ever ends up in Dallas. I used to operate under the assumption that when Oswald went to Dallas, he was completely unawares. He was not. Okay. He was not unaware. He had been prepped. He had been warned in advance. This is September 63. So when he goes to Mexico City and that whole thing falls through based on a CIA cock and bull story, and they reassign him back to Dallas, he knows full well why he's being reassigned to Dallas. He knows full well. Now, when he's initially, it takes a while to absorb this and understand that Nagell is right. Because initially, Oswald is skeptical. No, I don't think that's, I'm a CIA asset. I'm important here. I did this Russia mission. I succeeded. I'm doing this. I'm feeding information to the White House, to the FBI. The CIA's I've been part of this medical Manhattan project also. If I'm Oswald, I'm thinking, why would they waste me, all the training I've received that they've put me through and all the missions I've been successful? Why would they waste me in a fashion like that? They could do this with just about anybody. Why would they waste me? And, he thinks, bottom line, when you really get down to it, Oswald was a patriot. He thought he was doing right by his country, following orders, doing what he was ordered to do. The new war against the Soviets was the war of intelligence, and he was sort of the point man in this. He was the tip of the spear. So he's skeptical. He doesn't think, no, they wouldn't do that to me. But now by the time, and we know this from Judith Verey's conversations with him in Dallas, by the time he gets to Dallas, he realizes Nagell was right. Nagell was right. It takes him a little bit of time to arrive at that conclusion. Now, why did I say Nagell is in a box? Nagell has been ordered by the KGB to tell Oswald, and if Oswald listens to him and believes him and takes action to on his own to sabotage this whole plot, then he's done his job. But if he doesn't, they ordered him to kill him. And so, that's his friend, or and the other thing is he knows that Oswald is a CIA asset. He can't just kill a CIA asset. That would be back to his original story when he gets arrested outside that El Paso bank. That would be treason and murder. He was ordered by the KGB essentially to murder a CIA officer. That's murder. Okay. But if he doesn't do anything, the assassination plot goes forward, and that's treason. And when you get right back down to it, Nagell's, even though he's a double agent, his chief loyalty is to America. And so, although he's following through on what the KGB is telling him to do, he did go to Oswald and he told him what he was ordered to tell him. He will not kill him. He's going to try to find a way out of this to sabotage it himself. Since Oswald won't sabotage it, Nagell's going to try to sabotage it himself, because he knows if I kill him, that puts me in trouble with the CIA. If I don't kill him, that puts me in trouble with the KGB. One is murder, the other is treason. He's in a box. And he starts to realize that when his own CIA contact kind of cuts him off and leaves him dangling out there, and realizes that he is going to get wrapped into this patsy scenario because his association with Oswald too. So he's got to do something. Since Oswald won't do anything, he's got to do something. So instead of killing Oswald like he was ordered, Nagell sends a registered letter on September 17th to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. He just lays it out there. And this is why, again, I've said that several times already in previous episodes. J. Edgar Hoover knew about this plot in advance. He could have stopped it. Okay. This is one piece of evidence of that. There's others. All right. Oswald's informing of the FBI, et cetera, et cetera. Nagell says, I wrote in the letter, quote, I informed the director of the FBI and others, his CIA contacts, which would include, by the way, David Atlee Phillips. Okay. And that's a problem because David Atlee Phillips is involved in the Alpha 66 stuff. He's also in the disinformation campaign to set up Oswald with his whole Mexico City story. So when he informs his CIA contacts, he's essentially informing the enemy. As early as September 17th, 1963, that Lee Harvey Oswald and two of his Cuban associates, Leopoldo and Angel, were planning to assassinate the President of the United States, adding that he had, quote, received instructions to take care of Oswald, that is, to kill him, in September 1963. So I started off today. The question was, what did the Russians know about Oswald, and when did they know it? Well, what did they know? They knew he was a fake defector as soon as he sent that first letter to the American embassy in Moscow requesting permission to go back to the United States. Okay, and from that point forward, that kick-started an alternate plan to get him hitched to Marina, and then they assigned people that they knew could get close to Oswald, one of which was Richard Case Nagell, to keep tabs on him back in the United States, because they knew if he's coming back for a purpose. There's a reason that the American government is going to such lengths to bring back one of their own, a fake defector. So that's what they knew. Also, what they knew is through Richard Case Nagell, and what he's learning as he is staying close to Oswald, is that there is a plot to kill JFK, and that Oswald is being set up to be the patsy. And that if Oswald is the patsy and is blamed for the assassination, ergo, the Soviets are going to be blamed for it, or at the very least, Cuba. So they see all this in advance. They know it. They know it. And they're trying to preempt it. They are actively assigning one of their, what they think Nagel's on their side. They're assigning Nagell to take out this patsy so that it sabotages this whole plan. So that's what the Soviets knew. That's what the Russians knew. And when did they know? They knew as soon as he sends that letter to the American embassy, they know what Oswald is. And then as he comes back to America and they assign Richard Nagell to him, and he and Oswald infiltrates Leopoldo and Angel and Alpha 66, they learn what Alpha 66 is up to. And they learn what Leopoldo and Angel are up to. You know, you want to think about what Oswald, you could make the case that Oswald, by infiltrating this group like Alpha 66, for example, and informing the FBI, informing Bobby Kennedy, the White House, he saved us from a war with the Soviets. Because if you put yourself in Khrushchev's shoes, Kennedy promised to shut down Operation Ford. He lied, and he just changed the name to Operation Mongoose. That's lie number one. But then after the Cuban Missile Crisis, he promised again to shut all that down, and he did. But Khrushchev wouldn't know that, because as far as he can tell, everything's continuing. And, you get lied to twice like that, and that could lead to something. But because of Oswald's work, he is able, because Nagell is watching Oswald. So Oswald has infiltrated Alpha 66. He's informing, he's telling the White House, hey, this is what Alpha 66 is doing. And that's causing consternation in the White House. But Nagel's learning all this too because he's watching Oswald. And so Nagel's able to feed his KGB people, hey, this isn't the US government doing this. This is Alpha 66. And they say, well, how do you know that? Well, it's because the guy I'm watching, Oswald, has infiltrated, and this is what he's learned. And so this is not Kennedy. This is not the Kennedy brothers. This is Alpha 66. They're doing this on their own. So yeah, a case could be made that Oswald is keeping the peace between the United States and the Soviet Union at this time. And then they learn that he's going to get blamed for the assassination of JFK, which means they're going to get blamed. And that's going to lead to a war. At the very least, a war with Cuba. And so this letter by Nagell is an end run. He doesn't want to kill Oswald for the reasons we talked. First of all, there's probably a personal connection there. But secondly, he knows he can't kill him. That's murder and treason. That's his government's. He's essentially a government. He's an officer of the United States government. He works for the U.S. government. That would be murder at least. But if he does nothing, it's treason because JFK is killed. So he's trying to find a way out where maybe he can have somebody else sabotage the plan. He mistakenly thinks that J. Edgar Hoover is an honest broker here. And if he informs him what's going on, J. Edgar Hoover will take whatever measures are necessary to stop it. And in an indirect way, Lee Harvey Oswald will have stopped the second plot to kill JFK. So that's the beginning part. This is part one of what did the Russians know? When did they know it? And what did they know about Oswald? And then later, what did they know about the assassination? They know this is going down in September. Before Oswald ever gets to Dallas, they know all this. So, boy, that is so interesting from a geopolitical standpoint, just to think about all the ramifications. What important role Lee Harvey, this is honestly, I think he was a hero. He is literally, because of his ability to get information and his ability to infiltrate these groups, he's passing information up the chain through these channels and simultaneously several different directions, one to the White House, one to the FBI, one through Nagell back to the KGB, back to the Soviets. And it's all hinging on Oswald doing his job, doing it well. So, my goodness, this guy is not a rube. This guy didn't just fall off the turnip truck. This guy, he's good. He's good. And so Nagel's trying to figure out, is there a way that I can sabotage this plan? Back to that event in El Paso where he shoots the bank and ends up in a jail cell. Now we'll continue on this story in the next episode, how that all wraps up. But you can kind of see what he's thinking. He's as long as I'm out here, I'm at the mercy of my bosses telling me to do this, telling me to do that. But if I'm in a jail cell, they can't tell me to do anything. And I have the perfect alibi. If this assassination happens, I'm sitting in a jail cell. Wasn't me. I wasn't involved. You can't blame me. You can't say I was part of you can't make me the patsy. You can kind of see what he's thinking. It's a act of self-preservation is what it is. But before we get to that, he's trying to stave off what's coming. So anyway, pretty fascinating stuff. If you like what you are hearing and learning, hopefully you are learning something, feel free to subscribe to my channel. It's free. Hit the notification bell and the thumbs up button. Appreciate that. Also, feel free to check out my website, standardsplushistoryacademy.com, and see the materials that I have there available for homeschool students. all the histories in high school, U.S. history, world history, U.S. government, an elective class on JFK assassination, which is for anybody. And then also the opportunity to do online teaching if parents want me to actually teach their kids. I do that. I offer that as well. So anyway, I've got books on there. I've got blogs and podcasts and yada yada. So feel free to check out my website, and we will continue with this Richard Case Nagell story, whom Jim Garrison said is the most important witness in the whole JFK assassination. You can see why he's so important. This is huge stuff here. So we'll continue with that next episode. Until then, everybody have a great day. Thank you. I enjoyed that.